Not so long ago, I was reading some sections of Charles Moore's biography, or the first volume of Margaret Thatcher, and some phrases from the very end of it really struck me and led to a train of thought that I want to explore a little bit in this video. The end of this volume deals with the aftermath of the victory over Argentina in the Falklands War, and this scene takes place at a dinner at number 10, where Mrs. Thatcher gave dinner for the Lord Mayor and about 120 of those most involved in the Falklands victory. In her speech after dinner, she quoted the Duke of Wellington, "There is no such thing as a little war for a great nation." She spoke of the spirit of the Falklands and went on, "Or is it the spirit of Britain which, throughout history, has never failed us in difficult days?" She spoke like Queen Elizabeth I, remembered David Goodall. She looked like Queen Elizabeth I. So many people had been invited to the dinner that there was no room for spouses at table. Instead, they were invited for post-dinner drinks in the drawing rooms. Because all the main players in the Falklands crisis had been men, Mrs. Thatcher was the only woman at dinner. After the toast which followed her speech and the reply from Lord Lewin, the Prime Minister rose in her seat again and said, "Gentlemen, shall we join the ladies?" It may well have been the happiest moment of her life. Now, that allusion to Elizabeth I really struck me, because I think there are certain parallels between these two major women of history. Both were the centre of a sort of cult of male admirers. Obviously, with Elizabeth I, that took the form of her men, such men as Edmund Spenser, who wrote a very long poem, The Faerie Queene, of which Elizabeth I was, of course, the semi-divine figure of the title. I think there are other allusions to her from other courtiers of her being Diana, the moon goddess, or Astrea as well. Thatcher, obviously, the centre of adoration still for many Conservatives, even as she is hated by others for effectively deindustrialising Britain. Personal appearance. From the biography, it seems clear that Thatcher was very fastidious in her appearance. She loved shopping for clothes and expensive clothes, and that ties to Elizabeth I as well. But also this interesting note of masculinity, or feeling they had to take on a masculine angle or edge. Obviously, with Elizabeth I, there's her famous speech about, though she has the body of a weak woman, she has the heart of a man, of the king. Ernst Kantorowicz, famous medieval historian whose major work, The King's Two Bodies, explores a fascinating strand of political theology in medieval thought, whereupon the king had two bodies, his natural human body and a sort of almost divine kingly body that had been passed on from the previous king. So it was almost a way of explaining how the power of the monarch could continue across different people. And all kinds of strange things came out of this. So in the Civil War in the 1640s in England, the Parliament had to claim to be acting in the name of the king's divine body rather than, the king's biological body, as it were, because obviously the king's biological body was very much against them. Now, Elizabeth, one of her symbols was the phoenix, which turns out to have been androgynous, neither male or female. And this was probably chosen to say how she, though a woman, could continue this lineage of the king's body, as the phoenix died and then rose again. So the previous monarch had died, and now Elizabeth, although of a different gender, well, not to Mary obviously, but to different gender to previous male monarchs, how she could take on that role. And that's the telling detail at the end of this biography, of course, is Thatcher saying, "Shall we join the ladies?" So interesting parallels. And what does that mean? Well, maybe I think of Roland Barthes, the French theorist. His book Mythologies from, I think it's the 1950s, maybe the 60s. At the end of that, he talks about how the left don't have any good myths. They're all about things like better hospitals, better infrastructure, things like that, which, although may well be helpful to people, aren't going to capture people's imaginations in the same way that parties on the right, so to speak, very much can do, with myths of national greatness and great figures of the past to admire and look up to and that sort of thing. But I wonder if this does apply to Thatcher, who obviously is seen as a right-wing figure, in that in many ways her ideology, what's been called neoliberalism, making the market unfettered from regulations, deregulating the market, a small state, so to speak, even though she didn't go nearly as far as many in that train of thought. All of that is really rather dry. It's all about numbers and, regulations and the kind of mathematical calculations and stuff that actually isn't really going to be particularly inspiring to the man on the street. And you could say that this maybe is a crisis of the Conservative Party now. In what way are they conservative? What does conservatism even mean when they have, in many ways, not conserved certain values of the past, rightly or wrongly, socially at least, but only have this rather stale and uninspiring economic doctrine to hold on to? And maybe Thatcher needed the Falklands conflict. She needed this sort of theme of national greatness to add some meat to those bones. She needed to be seen as this heroic leader who in some way had taken on the mantle of past greatness and glory. And this kind of idea continues to today. Britain, in its economic catastrophe, people are still hungering for something of that myth. And from my perspective, it's very questionable whether that will hold up in the long run. And maybe this is the crisis of what might be called modernity or late capitalism, is when previous myths have been more or less destroyed or rendered in a quite different form by the power of the market. What's left? Can we construct new myths? Is that possible? We may be in the first phase of a civilization where we haven't been born into certain myths in quite the same way as previous eras. We might be some of the first people to have to pick over the ruins of past myths and ideologies to try and construct one now. But can anything like that that's been obviously constructed ever be as convincing again? Maybe that's a challenge we face.